We've gone north, south, west, and east in Israel. So tonight we're gonna visit some places in the middle. We're going to, yeah, can't talk. We're going to include parts of modern day Samaria and Judea. We're going to start up north at Ma'alot Tarshisha. And it's a city about 20 kilometers east of Nahariya, which is pretty far north. It sits at about 600 meters above sea level. The city was established in 1963 through municipal merger. Can't talk tonight. Municipal merger of the Arab town of Tarshisha, Tarshiha, excuse me, and I'm trying to Hebraicize it. It's Tarshiha, and the Jewish town of Ma'alot. In 2019, the city had a population of 21,836. Nearby is Montfort Lake, a man-made body of water. Do we have a second slide?
Yeah. Oops, here we go.
Yeah, Montfort Lake, a man-made body of water with walking, running, rollerblading, biking, and skateboarding paths around it. So you can see modern day Ma'alot. But unfortunately, the past of Ma'alot is not so wonderful. There was a devastating massacre in Ma'alot in May of 1974 that involved a 2-day hostage taking of 115 Israelis, which ended in the murder of 25 hostages and 6 other civilians. The attack was by 2 Palestinian terrorist groups. Of the 31 killed that day in May, unfortunately, 22 of them were children. Let's go someplace that has a bit more upbeat vibe. We're going to go to Carmiel. Carmiel was established in 1964 as a development town in the Beth HaKerem Valley, which divides the lower and the upper Galilee. The city is on the Acher Safed Road, 20 miles from Sfat and 12 miles from Ma'alot Tarshisha. In 2019, it had a population of 46,252. Carmiel was one of the first cities in Israel to be established according to an urban master plan. 40% of its residents are immigrants from about 75 countries. Since 1990, 1,600 immigrants arrived, the majority of whom were from the former Soviet Union. According to the Times of Israel, Israeli Arabs now constitute about 6% of Carmiel's population. There are 2 parks in the city. At the entrance of the city is a Holocaust Memorial Park with a bronze sculpture by Jewish sculptor and artist Nikki Imber. The sculptures are in 3 groups: Holocaust, Wondering, and Hope, which represent the story of the Jewish people from the time of the Holocaust to the return to the Holy Land. The middle one is the Hope statue. The second park in Carmiel is the Carmiel Quarries Park. It's about 12.4 acre park developed on the site of a now defunct limestone quarry. One section of the park is a sculpture garden and an amphitheater on the grounds of the park hosts local events and incorporates a drainage system that collects rainwater, which is later used for watering the greenery of the park. So Israel is obviously it's obviously on the up as far as ecology goes. I have a little note here that says, talk about Moshav Carmiel, experience dinner with Moshavniks and women's projects. Okay, so this is where I go sort of astray from my notes. Moshav Carmiel is right outside of Carmiel. It's a Moshav Shitufi that has a lot of Americans. Some friends of mine from Israel made Aliyah there. And one cold and rainy night, my trip to Israel with my synagogue in New Jersey stopped there. And the woman talking started talking and introduced herself and talked about the kibbutz and talked about how there are women's projects with the kibbutz and Arab women for the environment and projects for women's activities and women's rights. Turns out that the woman speaking was someone that I used to daven with in Philadelphia. I knew her and her parents, and her daughter had been in nursery school with my youngest son. So I went over to her and I introduced myself and told her who I was, and she sort of remembered me. And I said, I'm sorry, your husband and your daughter aren't here. Well, my husband's working and my daughter's in the Army. And I said, oh, that's great. Karen's in the Army. The last time I saw Karen, I think she was about 4. That's when they made Aliyah. So it was a nice reunion. Okay, we are going to go next to Saknin.
Oh, this is more Carmiel.
Okay. Saknin is an Arab city in Israel's northern district. It was declared a city in 1995. In 2019, its population was 31,702, mostly Muslim, with a sizable Christian minority. It is built over 3 hills, and it is mostly in the valley between. Its rural landscape, even though it is considered a city, is almost entirely covered by olive and fig groves, as well as oregano and sesame shrubs. I mean, I'm learning something new. Isaac, you probably knew that sesame and oregano grow on shrubs. New to me. Saknin is first mentioned in 1479 BCE in ancient Egyptian records as the center for the production of indigo dye. It's situated on an ancient site where remains of cisterns and columns have been found. You can probably see the insides of a cistern there. A cistern excavated near the mosque in the old city center revealed pottery fragments from the 1st to 5th centuries CE. Rabbi Hananiah ben Taradion, who was killed by the Romans for teaching Jewish law, is said to have run a Torah academy in Saknin. Famous during the this. Okay, I'm going to have to do that. Rabbi, during he's mentioned in I can't talk tonight. In the Haggadah and also in the Martyrology during Yom Kippur. During the 1948 War for Independence, Israel took over the town. Most of the residents fled north, but the ones that stayed were not expelled by the Israeli soldiers. However, the town stayed under martial law until 1966. In 2003, the town's football club, Bnei Saknin, became one of the first Arab teams to play in the Israeli Premier League, the top tier for Israeli football, as we know it's soccer. Also in Saknin is Saknin College for Teacher Education. Thanks to Lynn for giving me this information because it wasn't evident on the internet. Saknin College aims to fulfill a range of vital needs in the Arab society in the Galilee. As the sole Arab teacher college in the Galilee, which is home to more than half of Israel's Arabic speakers, Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Bedouin, Saknin College educates, trains, and qualifies teachers and provides greater and more diverse opportunities for study for Arab students, especially women. Saknin College grants bachelor, master's degree in education and or a teacher certificate, as well as professional development education. Okay, we are leaving Saknin and heading for Shfaram. Shfaram is an Arab Muslim Druze city east of the Bay of Haifa and the site of an ancient Jewish Roman city, which was the second Galilee site of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, at the end of the 2nd century CE. In 2019, it had a population of 43,137, with a Sunni Muslim majority and a large Christian, Arab, and Druze minorities. Interesting to look at the right-hand picture because you can see the influence of the Arab architecture in the city. We're going to go on to Tel Megiddo, or in Arabic, T-E-L-L, Tel El Mutaselim, the Tell of the Governor, is an ancient city whose remains form an archaeological mound, a tell, in the northern central part of Israel, near Kibbutz Megiddo, about 30 kilometers to the southwest of Haifa. Tel Megiddo is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is one of the crown jewels in Israeli archaeology. Back to Sandy's love of rocks. Remains of more than 25 cities representing every period of ancient history in the land of Israel have been uncovered. There's even I think there's a book out about Megiddo at home. I'll look that up for you. I have it at home. Megiddo is known for its historical, geographical, and theological importance, especially under the Greek name Armageddon. That should tip you off to something was going on there. During the Bronze Age, Megiddo was an important Canaanite city-state, and during the Iron Age, a royal city of the Kingdom of Israel, the Northern Kingdom, after the split following King Solomon's death. Okay. Kibbutz Megiddo was built in 1949, a year after the War for Independence, on the site of a depopulated Arab village of Lejun, probably depopulated by Muslims fleeing out of Arab nations' propaganda during the 1948 war. In 2019, the kibbutz had a population of 847 people. The kibbutz has an Italian restaurant on it. The interesting thing I found out about this kibbutz is that 70 years after it was founded by Hashomer Hatzair movement, a very left-wing socialist Zionist movement, Kibbutz Megiddo inaugurated its first synagogue. For decades, kibbutzim in the Jezreel Valley, like Kibbutz Megiddo, were seen as leaders for secular values in Israel. Hashomer Hatzair, like I said, is and was a leftist Zionist group, even having youth groups in the U.S. I knew some people in Shomer Hatzair in high school. However, residents of the kibbutz have lately come closer to traditional Jewish values, and after 20 years of debating, they voted to establish a synagogue there on the kibbutz in 2020, and you can see the ribbon cutting for the Beit Knesset. Okay, we're going on to El Fam.
Oh, can I have a side note here?
Yeah.
So guess what happens if you try and do a search for a city and you can't spell alpha and you just try to search for really good results, but they didn't have anything to do with this city.
Yeah, thank God we found it. Okay, it's a city located 20 kilometers northwest of Jenin. We'll get to Jenin soon. In 2019, its population of 56,109 was nearly all Arab citizens of Israel. The city is situated on the Al-Fam mountain ridge. There have been protests there because a higher crime rate in this Arab Israeli town. However, there are several archaeological sites around the city that date to the Iron Age, the Second Iron Age, as well as to the Persian, Hellenistic, Roman, early Muslim, and the Middle Ages. The Al-Fam Art Gallery was established in 1996 as a venue for contemporary art exhibitions and a home for original Arab and Palestinian art. There is one other artist who is still, who has had an exhibition there, whose work is still on show at the gallery. Her name is Yoko Ono. Widow of John Lennon, for those of you who are asleep right now. Okay. I found it very interesting that Yoko would take a place in the West Bank somewhere in the middle of nowhere to show her work, but never mind. Yeah. Okay, Jenin. I've never been to Jenin, and probably for good reason. It is a Palestinian city in the northern West Bank. It serves as the administrative center of the Jenin Governorate and is a major center for the surrounding towns. In 2007, the city had a population of approximately 40,000 people. However, the Jenin refugee camp had a population of 10,000. Jenin was one of the places where people got stuck and the Arab nations would not take them in and Israel could not take them in. Jenin is under the administration of the Palestinian Authority, although officially part of the State of Israel, since it was taken in 1967 in the Six-Day War. As part of the Oslo Accords in 1996, Israel handed over control of the city to the Palestinian National Authority, now being a Palestinian city with very few Jews, except Israeli army members, go there. But it is still a major city in the area. The Arab American University is in Jenin. Cinema Jenin is the largest movie theater in the area. And there is also a lot of culture happening in Jenin. The Strings of Freedom is an orchestra in Jenin founded by an Arab citizen of Israel, Wafa Yunus, who travels from her home in central Israel to teach music to local youth. Jenin is commonly identified with the biblical city of En Ganin, the spring of gardens. Tel Jenin, believed to constitute the original settlement core of the city, is located at the center of what is today Jenin's business district. As far as I remember, intercity Egged buses, Israel's state bus line, avoid Jenin, going around it whenever possible. Okay, we are going, you can see the movie theater. Okay, we're going to go to Kabatia or Gabatia, another town in the West Bank. And it's been part of Israel since 1967. After the Oslo II Accords in 1995, it came under the Palestinian Authority administration in what is now known as Areas A and B. In the area, approximately 10 Palestinians were killed between October 2015 and July 2016 while carrying out attacks against Israelis. Gabatia is famous for its olive groves, modern agriculture, and limestone quarry. So there are things going on there that help Israel and help the citizens of the area. And you can see, I think those are olives. Yeah. Oh, yummy.
Yeah, we got the quarry.
Those are yummy black olives, and you can see someone working in the limestone quarry. Now I'm getting hungry. Now I want a can of olives. Okay. Next we're going to Tubas, which is also a Palestinian city northeast of Nablus. Since the Six-Day War, it was captured but transferred to the Palestinian National Authority control in 1995 under an interim agreement of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Tubas has not seen much violence, but a number of incidents occurred during the Second Intifada, which began in 2000. About 1,100 residents of Tubas fled during the 1967 war, most to the Suf refugee camp in Jordan. Tubas contains 6 mosques and the Holy Trinity Greek Orthodox Church, built in 1976 to serve the small Orthodox Christian community there. The Al-Quds Open University, housed in Jerusalem, has a campus in Tubas known as Al-Quds Open University Tubas Educational Region.
That's what we have a picture of.
And that's what the picture is. It's of the university campus in Tubas. In 2006, 1,789 students were enrolled in the university, and it had 90 professors and 24 other employees. Okay, next place we're going to is not easy for me to talk about. Shechem, or Nablus as it's known, was the first Jewish city in the world, and Joseph, favorite son of Jacob, was buried in the eastern side of the city, near what is called Jacob's Well. Also nearby at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal are nearby there. Nablus is also home to the world's smallest religious community, the Samaritans. Thank you for introducing it, Isaac. An ethno-religious group of the Levant that has a parallel but separate religion to Judaism. Nablus is on the West Bank, just 66 kilometers from Jerusalem. It has 130,000 inhabitants and is the second largest after Hebron city in the West Bank. Nablus is considered the nerve center of the West Bank. It's considered a beautiful and ancient city known as the uncrowned Queen of Palestine. There's a lot going on, but not much tourism. Arabs don't come in and out real often, and Jewish tourism, as I said before, sort of avoids the city. Its most famous exports are olive oil, soap, cotton, and carob. Hey, that'd be something you could try instead of chocolate. Oops. Nablus is a hotbed for Palestinian activism. On the streets and street corners, you can see pictures of those who died in the struggle against Israel next to the Palestinian flag. Like I said, not a lot of Israelis want to go there. One can visit the mesmerizing old city, if you do decide to go, with the Al-Kasaba or the Kasbah, a labyrinthine market with spice stalls, fresh fruit and vegetables, pastry stands, and clothing racks, jewelry, and a whole lot more. Sort of like a shuk in either the old city of Jerusalem or the shuk in the new city. One of the fascinating spots is the Samaritan settlement and archaeological remains on the top of Mount Gerizim, or Mount Gerizim in Hebrew, which is essentially the Samaritan Mecca, and a place brimming with history. This group of Samaritans living on the slope is apparently the oldest and smallest religious seat in the entire world, believing themselves to be the 162nd generation descendants from Joseph. Their belief, not ours. It is also their belief that Moses ordered them to protect the mountain and that it is the place where Abraham was commanded to sacrifice Isaac. Like I said, their beliefs, not ours. Below Mount Gerizim, there are many historical and beautiful sights to see in Nablus, including the Greek Orthodox Church and Jacob's Well, Be'er Yaakov. Oh, and you can see the market and a mall. And it is a spot, according to John chapter 4, verses 13 and 14, where Christians believe a Samaritan woman offered Jesus a drink of water, after which he told her that he was the Messiah. Okay, the story of the Good Samaritan, I suppose, starts there. In the serene, lush gardens, the current church of Saint Fotina, the Samaritan built the Greek Orthodox Church in 1860. There's a large fortress-like compound of Abd al-Hadi Palace built in the 19th century, and the Qaryun are also in the old city. There are also several mosques: the Old Mosque, the Great Mosque of Nablus, the Al-Qadr and the Al-Qadr Mosque. There's also the Hamas or Turkish baths in the old city. Most prominent of them is the Al-Shifa, built in 1624, and the Al-Hara, the latest to be built in the 19th century. Although Nablus has malls with reasonably priced Palestinian restaurants and places to stay, personally, I would skip it, but that's because it's still mostly a Muslim Arab city. Where I've been told, generally Jews are not welcome. But as you can see, it's becoming a modern town, but it still has old sites in it. Okay. We are going to go down the West Bank to Ariel, which is an Israeli settlement and city in the central West Bank, approximately 20 kilometers east of the Green Line and 34 kilometers west of Jerusalem border. It was established in 1978 and its population was 20,540 in 2019, composed of veteran and young Israelis with English-speaking immigrants and immigrants from the former Soviet Union. In addition, an influx of over 10,000 students. It is the fourth largest Jewish settlement on the West Bank. In 2005, the residents of Netzarim, a former Israeli settlement in the Gaza Strip, which had been evacuated when Gaza was emptied of Jews, found temporary housing in the dormitories of the Ariel University Center in Samaria. At the beginning of the academic year, about a third of those chose to resettle in Ariel, and some chose to stay there permanently. The city has shopping centers, 2 industrial zones, and a library. In 2008, Israel approved the building of 27 new factories, which were expected to be completed by September of 2009. Ariel University, founded as the College of Judea in Samaria in 1982, was later accredited as a university. The current enrollment as of this article is 12,000, consisting of both Jewish and Arab students. Somewhere in this neighborhood is Rabbi Leichner's kibbutz. Isaac, if you would like to say a couple of words, please do. You want to unmute yourself?
No, I was just wondering, he's in Gadnei Shomron, which is not far from here, I think.
Yeah.
It's like, Gadnei Shomron is like 10 miles or so northwest of Ariel.
Yeah, I can look it up for next week.
Is that some dude in a Santa Claus hat sitting there having lunch?
I don't think so. I just think he's
I don't know.
just in a weird hat.
Just me.
No, it's pink.
It's just a weird hat.
It's pink. It's not
Gadnei
red.
Shomron.
One's red, isn't it? Well, the
looks
lady's
like-
wearing red. The lady.
Lady's wearing a red
Oh, that's old lady. Okay.
but the other person.
Aha. Yes. See,
I think
that's a
it's-
cultural bias on my part.
Uh-huh.
Confirmation bias.
Now, I see Barcan is not far from there. Barcan is, they make wines there, right? There's a big winery there.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm getting to it. But next we're gonna go somewhere that I also don't like going. We're going to Ramallah.
Oh, great.
Oh, I missed
Lovely.
Ramallah. There it is.
Yeah, lovely, yeah. Ramallah is a Palestinian city in the West Bank, located 10 kilometers, 6 miles north of Jerusalem, at an average of 880 meters above sea level. It currently serves as the de facto administrative capital of the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian National Authority, the PNA. However, ancient rock cut tombs have been found near Ramallah, and potsherds from Crusaders and Ayyubid period have also been identified with the Crusader palace called Ramali. Remains of a building with an arched doorway from the Crusader era called Al-Burj have also been identified, but the original use of the building is as of yet undetermined. Modern Ramallah was founded in the mid 1500s by the Haddadins, a clan of brothers descended from Ghassanid Christians. The present day Hadassins, as well as other families, arrived from the east of the Jordan River, in the areas of Karak and Shubak in the 1830s. Edward Robinson, an American biblical scholar, visited the area and described Ramallah as a large Christian village of well-built stone homes standing on a high ridge with a view to the west extending to the sea. At that time, about a quarter of the inhabitants were Roman Catholic and the rest were Greek Orthodox. In the 21st century, a large community with direct descendants from the Haddadins who founded Ramallah live in the United States. The town, is now predominantly Muslim, but still has a Christian minority. By 1953, Ramallah's population doubled, but its economy and infrastructure could not accommodate the poor villagers. Natives of Ramallah started to emigrate mostly to the US. And by 1956, about 1/4 of Ramallah's 6,000 natives had left, with Arabs from surrounding towns and villages, particularly Hebron, buying the homes and lands the emigres left behind. During the 6-Day War in 1967, Israel captured Ramallah from Jordan. They imposed a military closure and conducted a census. Everyone registered in the census was given an Israeli identity card, which enabled them to continue to reside there. Those people who were abroad during the census, unfortunately, lost their residency rights. Kind of a sad period for Israel. However, for the residents of Ramallah, for the first time in 19 years, they had the freedom to visit Israel and the Gaza Strip and engage in commerce there. Unlike the Jordanians, the Israelis did not give them citizenship. They were issued permits to work in Israel, but did not gain the rights associated with Israeli citizenship. Ramallah remained under Israeli military rule for more than 4 decades. The Israel Civil Administration, established in 1981, was in charge of civilian day-to-day services such as issuing permission to travel, to build, to export and import, and host relatives from abroad. The civil administration reprinted Jordanian textbooks for schools, but did not update them. The civilian administration was also responsible for tax collection and land appropriation, which at times included Israeli seizure of olive groves that the Arab villagers had tended for generations. According to Israeli human rights activists, the development of Jewish settlements in Ramallah prevented the expansion of the city and cut it off from the surrounding Arab villages. These unfortunate situations most likely prompted many Ramallah residents to be early supporters of the First Intifada. On September 13, 1993, when Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and the Palestine leader Yasser Arafat shook hands at the meeting at the White House, school children in Ramallah handed out olive branches to Israeli soldiers patrolling the streets, which tells you something about the internal working of the city and the external working of politics. In December of 1995, in keeping with the Oslo Accords, the Israeli army withdrew to the city limits, and the Palestinian Authority assumed civilian and security responsibilities for the city, which was designated under Area A under the Oslo Accords. After the Oslo Accords, many expatriates returned and set up businesses. Unfortunately, with an increase in Israeli settlements nearby, the Israelis put down new restrictions on Palestinians, and the Palestinians started to have more and more violent reactions to them. The failure of the Camp David summit in July of 2000 led to the outbreak of the Second Intifada in September 2000. There were many protests in Ramallah, and over time, they were replaced by sporadic violence. In October 2020, unfortunately, 2 Israeli reservists took a wrong turn and ended up in Ramallah and were lynched by a mob. Israel later succeeded in prosecuting some of those involved in the deaths of the reservists. With Ramallah as the capital of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat was also buried there on November 12, 2004. There are currently many foreign nations who have diplomatic missions to the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. Okay, let's go somewhere Jewish. Let's go to Modi'in. Modi'in, which is west of Ramallah and slightly northeast of Jerusalem, might ring a bell with some of you. Historically, Modi'in is connected, is that my phone? With the Maccabees of Hanukkah fame. However, modern day Modi'in comprises several cities and towns. The first we will cover tonight is Modi'in Illit, which is a Haredi, very Orthodox right-wing Israeli settlement, and a city in the West Bank, midway between Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim. It's located 3.7 miles northeast of Modi'in Maccabin Re'ut. It is often referred to as Kiryat Sefer, the book town, the name of its first neighborhood established in 1994. It was built on the land of 5 Palestinian villages, and unfortunate and ongoing fight between the Israeli government and some of the international community. However, Modi'in Illit has grown so much that it now is the largest Jewish settlement in the area. An archaeological site, now known as Kirbet Bad Issa, was discovered by the archaeology department of the civil administration in Modi'in Illit in 1994. First protested by the Haredi community because of their obvious reaction to it being a religious site. The excavations eventually, they withdrew their protests, and the excavations eventually revealed what is believed to have been a family village from the Second Temple period, with a synagogue in the center, a ritual bath, homes, and large public and private buildings, a wine press, as well as a collection of 145 Roman coins from the 1st century CE. Kirbat Bat Isa was designated as a heritage site for the Haredi public in 2011, with the Israeli government and the civil administration contributing to its development, both economically and together they did. They let it grow. You can see a picture of some of the apartments in Modi'in Illit and a picture of the archaeological site at Kirbet Bad Issa. Next, we're going to go to Modi'in Maccabim Reut, another town midway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Was named after the ancient Jewish town of Modi'in, which existed in the same area. Modi'in was the place of the original Maccabees, the Jewish rebels who tried to free Judea from the Seleucid Empire during the Hasmonean dynasty. The events commemorated by the Hanukkah festival. I got a little note here, just Ixnay on the latkes and sufganiyot. It's all in the oil. The modern city was built in the 20th century, but an ancient city was in the vicinity, as described in the Talmud, though the specific location is uncertain. Do we put down a map of do we have a map of the possible locations?
I don't think so.
Okay, there is a map of like 5 different locations where the ancient city might have been. Ancient Jewish artifacts, as said before, believed to be dated to the First Temple and Hasmonean periods, have been found in the area. The modern city was built in the 1990s and was later merged with the nearby towns of Maccabim and Leut. The city was built as a modern planned city with high standards of urban planning, with large green spaces incorporated into the city layout. The city was opened for residency in 1996. In and around Modi'in is a mall and several parks, Wadi Anaba Park west of the city and Park Modi'in. The latest innovation to hit Modi'in is a large underground railway station in Modi'in. In 2007, service began to Pa'atei Modi'in in the western outskirts of the city.
Oh, this is the main train station.
And you can see the main train station upper right. This railway connects Modi'in to Tel Aviv via Ben Gurion Airport. I've been on the train. The line to Modi'in is a spur off the high-speed railway to Jerusalem. I made it to the top of Jerusalem. Once you change trains in Modi'in, it's a 30-minute climb up the hills to Jerusalem. Being a train buff, I guess I mentioned that before, I of course took the ride. I mean, I could have taken a Sheirut from Tel Aviv. I could have had somebody pick me up, but I took the train. And in spite of the bus transfers I had to make to get to where I was going in Jerusalem, I made it. But the ride was worthwhile. Passing many kibbutzim on the outskirts of Tel Aviv and small settlements in Arab towns in the West Bank, the trip up the hill to Jerusalem is filled with ravines, hills, and groves of olive trees, and of course, lots of rocks. Yay!
Sandy likes rocks.
Sandy likes rocks. Sandy likes trains. Let's go ahead to Moshav Mevio Modi'in, near the modern city of Modi'in, but nestled into the Beit Shemen forest. It was highly damaged by a forest fire in May 2019, and it's hard to get pictures of the Moshav pre-forest fire. The Moshav was founded by the late Rav Shlomo Carlebach and a small group of his followers. When the small group approached the Jewish Agency with their desire to start a Moshav Shitufi, the authorities of the Jewish Agency were highly amused by this bunch of American hippies wanting to start an agricultural community. They were given a small abandoned moshav on a road to nowhere. I can attest to that. Wait a few minutes and I'll tell you a personal story. It is indeed on the road to nowhere. They started, of course, what kind of industry on a moshav would hippies from America start? They started a granola factory and started to make and sell tofu. Then a very small health food market in Israel. Hardly anybody was eating tofu. The real purpose of the moshav was to create a rural, back to the land spiritual community. Rav Shlomo visited frequently in the first few years, and he lived more often in the 1970s and early 80s there. The people who formed the moshav had struggles. Most of them had little money and hardly spoke any Hebrew. You could still hear English spoken more often than Hebrew when I visited. Outside skeptics gave them little chance to succeed. However, the people of the moshav were determined, a very determined lot. Many of them had given up comfortable lives in America, and they were, according to some, spiritual revolutionaries, according to many, and many of them were musicians, artists, poets, writers, and yoga instructors, midwives, and craftspeople. The community petitioned to change the name of the moshav to Meor Modi'in, perhaps to remind the people of the Maccabees and the Hanukkah story, and as an aspiration for the moshav. And to remind them of the fire of Torah. In the 1980s and early 1990s, Carl Bach would often visit the Moshav for Shabbat. His daughter Dari took over his old home on the Moshav, where Rav Shlomo died. He lived there and with many people from Canada and the US until his death in 1994. And a lot of people came to the Moshav for Shabbat, setting up tents in backyards and in the forest nearby. By some accounts, it was very reminiscent of Woodstock, but the only performance was by Rav Karl Bach during his davening. After the fire on the Moshav, the Israeli personality and columnist Yedidia Meir visited the Moshav, and he couldn't believe the amount of items that had been donated, and that various agencies were telling people to stop donations because there was no place to store them. Dari Karl Bach, daughter of the late Rav Shlomo and a resident of the Moshav, remains steadfast in her beliefs that the community will overcome this destruction. And I quote, "My father said that fire can destroy and kill, but one's internal fire can not be extinguished. I know that the internal fire has not burned, and that this Moshav will once again thrive because the nation of Israel is strong. It is impossible to burn the heart that dwells inside the collective soul of the Moshav." On one of my trips to Israel, I had the privilege of visiting the Moshav. My daughter-in-law Tzipi and her best friend Sarah Kramer, my granddaughter Meirav, Tehila was not around yet. She has my other granddaughter, who was about 1.5, 2 at the time. They took me to the Moshav for a Rosh Chodesh women's event in August. Very hot, very dusty. We took a bus to the middle of nowhere. I mean, the bus let us off. We said we wanted to go to the Moshav, and they just let us off and pointed up the road. However, we walked in the direction that they told us to go, and we eventually reached the entrance to the Moshav. We asked around for the women's meeting and were told to go to various places on the Moshav until we found the correct spot. It was standing room only, both inside and outside. It was amazing. I mean, wall to wall women, even outside to the next building. We ended up listening as best we could to the lecture outside, but then we got the chance to join the singing with what seemed to be like hundreds of women for at least 20 minutes. Refreshments were served, and somehow we managed to score a ride back into Jerusalem. How we all fit into the car, it was like 3 of us women and my granddaughter, and I think we played past Meirav around. She sat on Tzipi's lap, she sat on Sarah's lap, she sat on my lap. It was very crowded, but somehow we made it back to Jerusalem. All I can remember about the trip back was that I'm not sure how well the air conditioning was working, but I was glad to be in a moving vehicle, even though it was very crowded. I was also glad that Meirav at 1.5 or 2 wasn't very heavy at the time, because I sort of remember having her on my lap for most of the time. I believe, actually, she was about 2, maybe 2.5 at the time, because as I remember, my daughter-in-law Tippy, I think, was just pregnant. So
How long ago was that?
Merab is now 11 and Tehillah is now 8. So it was a while ago, but it was a memorable trip. Okay,
Next slide.
next slide. I have more storytelling. We're going to end tonight with a visit to the city of Beit Shemesh. Beit Shemesh is a city located 19 miles west of Jerusalem. In 2019, it had a population of 124,957. The history of Beit Shemesh goes back to pre-biblical times. The ruins of the ancient biblical city can be seen at Tel Beit Shemesh, or Tel El Ruknel El, a tel located near the modern city. On a tour from Tel Aviv, you can visit the caves of Bet Guvrin, Maresha, and Sorek. There are stalactite and stalagmite caves. It is the Bet Guvrin, Marisha, and Sorek Stalactite Cave National Park, and a trained guide will point out distinct stalactite and stalagmites. And somehow I never expected to see that outside of the US. Bet Guvrin Marisha National Park. In Bet Guvrin Marisha National Park, you can visit a Roman amphitheater, Crusader Church, and the Bell Caves, and more. There are also nature and wildlife areas in the Ila Valley nearby to Beit Shemesh. Yay, wineries. There are also several wineries in Beit Shemesh. Woohoo! The Tzora Vineyards, the Flam Winery, which give tours and tastings, and many other vineyards. Okay. On a personal note, I have been to Beit Shemesh twice. The first time, my lovely husband sitting here and I visited not sure if Joe was along. Yes, he was. We visited with my son Ronen, and we went to visit Eve Wimpheimer, the past assistant principal of the Bergen County High School of Jewish Studies, where all my kids studied after Hebrew school, and I was in New Jersey. I was president of the board there for 2 years. Eve, who's originally from England, and her husband Jack, originally from Teaneck, New Jersey, moved to Beit Shemesh when they retired, because one of their kids lives there. It was a wonderful afternoon, and the views from her apartment up the hill, Beit Shemesh, by the way, is built on a hillside, they were spectacular. Eve, being brought up in England, served us a delightful afternoon proper English tea, but with an Israeli flair, hummus, pita, and of course cake, and of course Vysotsky tea. My second trip to Beit Shemesh was in an evening to attend the wedding of a friend of my son Ronen. He and his wife Tippy knew both the bride and the groom. I think they had something to do with them getting together, or I think they set them up with the matchmaker that finally got them together. I remembered after writing this that Ronen, Sippy, and Mirav and I went by bus. I'm not sure why we went by bus, but I guess we couldn't find a Sheirut out of Jerusalem going to Beit Shemesh on a Thursday night. They were all taken, so we found a bus, which was an exciting adventure. Since we really didn't know where the venue was or where to get off the bus, fortunately for us, there were other passengers on the bus that were in the same dilemma. They were all going to the same wedding. However, after the wedding, as I recall, we tried to make the last bus back to Jerusalem and failed. We were 10 minutes late for the last bus. Beit Shemesh is far enough away that the bus is shut down at a certain time. I can't remember how we got back, but I think we shared a Sheirut with a bunch of other people who were stranded. So of course, it was Ronen and actually Tehillah I think Tehillah was born then. I sort of remember. Yeah, this was with Ronen, his wife, Tzipi, both of my granddaughters, Merav and Tehillah, and me. So it's 3 adults and 2 extremely exhausted children. Somehow we ended up in the bus, in the Sheirut, and we got back. But what we didn't realize at that time was that the Sheirut at that hour of night, 11:30 at night, would only take you to the central bus station. So to finish our trip back, I believe they were still in Nachlaot, which is near the central bus station. We got off the Sheirut on the side of the bus station near to where my son lived. Ronen took one of my granddaughters, Tzipi took the other one. I took all of our belongings from the wedding and we schlepped our way back to the apartment. Traveling with my son is always fun. I have one other item to mention about that's related to Beit Shemesh. One Shabbat in Jerusalem, I was invited for lunch through Havdalah at a friend of my son, Ronen. One of the other guests was the sister of 2 of Ronen's friends from Beit Shemesh. I told her that my husband had a high school friend who had moved to Beit Shemesh, Steve Unger, then known as Shmuel.
No, he was known as Steve. Well, Shmuel.
Shmuel. He
became Shmuel.
He became Shmuel when he moved to Beit Shemesh. The woman then told me that she was a childhood best friend of Shmuel's daughter Karen. At that point along the line, I had schlepped all over Yerushalayim before Shabbat, looking for a kippah for a bar mitzvah kid that I was tutoring. Turns out it was Karen's first cousin in America, who was one of my B'nai Mitzvah students in Glen Rock, which is right next to Ridgewood. I had been looking for a kippah that had the blue of his eyes and some red in it to represent his gorgeous smile. I found the kippah and I found Josh's first cousin. On my second organized trip to Israel with the rabbi from Ridgewood, Josh and his whole family were on the trip. And on Josh's 7th birthday, we called the United States because it was also Joe's birthday. Joe and Josh Unger's share a birthday.
39 years apart. And his father, I grew up with his father, and she was talking about Karen's father, Steve or Shmuel. They grew up in my synagogue in New Jersey.
Yeah, Israel keeps reminding me that it's still a very small Jewish world, and things happen in Israel that you never expect. You don't expect to be able to get to a place or home from a place, and things always seem to work out, which is, I think, one of the mysteries and wonders of Israel.